Good evening all, and welcome back to Fear Knocks. Tonight, we walk the empty promenades that sleep under fog and salt. Boardwalks sealed for the winter. Prize booths tarped. Ferris wheels frozen mid-climb. The crowds have gone inland, but the sound never stopped. It only changed pitch. Caretakers, electricians, and night security still file reports about counters that relock from the inside, and radios that answer without power. What drifts through these places isn't legend. It's maintenance notes, voicemail fragments, and sensor logs pulled from shuttered arcades between storms. These are 10 true accounts drawn from off-season boardwalk records, gathered to remind us that silence at the shore is never empty. It listens back. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to Fear Knocks for weekly documentary-style true horror that blurs the line between evidence and nightmare. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let's step onto the damp boards where the lights went out, but something kept counting. I've been on night watch for over a decade, mostly along this stretch of the coast. The shift starts at 2200, ends at 6. My patrol covers a dozen businesses, from the old seafood restaurant at the pier's end to the mini golf course 3 blocks inland. Most nights are quiet, a rhythm of clicks and checks. Flashlight beam cutting through the dark, radio clipped to my belt, a heavy ring of keys, and the security tablet for logging everything. It's a job about vigilance, about knowing the subtle shifts in the environment. A misplaced trash can, a faint light where there shouldn't be one, the sound of the ocean wind rattling a loose pane. Every detail matters. The boardwalk arcade is always the most complex part of the route. Even after closing, it hums with residual energy. The faint scent of stale popcorn and sugar, a ghost of the day's chaos. My procedure here is thorough. Main entrance doors, emergency exits, fire escapes, then the perimeter windows. Each lock, each bar, checked physically. My tablet records the timestamp and status. It's a system designed to be foolproof, ensuring that once I've swept through, the building is a sealed, empty shell until morning. The rule is simple. A secured door stays secured. Anything else is a breach. On Tuesday, around 1:30, I made my first full circuit through the arcade. The main games floor was dark, the flashing screens now inert black rectangles. I moved past the skee-ball lanes, the air hockey tables, towards the back where the prize booth stood. It's a glass-fronted counter, packed with cheap toys and electronics, secured by a heavy steel bar that slides into a recessed jamb. Tonight, as my flashlight hit it, I saw the bar was off its housing. Resting against the jamb, the booth door slightly ajar. I frowned, pulling out my tablet. This wasn't right. The closing crew was usually meticulous. I pushed the door open, sweeping the beam inside. Empty. Just shelves of plush animals and plastic gadgets. No signs of forced entry. No disturbed merchandise. It looked like a simple oversight, maybe a new hire on the closing shift, or just a tired mistake. It happened. I'd seen it before. I made a mental note to flag it in my report, then slid the heavy steel bar into its housing, feeling the solid click as it seated. I gave it a firm tug, testing its hold. Secure. I logged the door as secured, previously unsecured, and continued my patrol. A small mundane memory surfaced then, a flicker of a summer afternoon from when I was a kid. My father had taken me to this very arcade. I remembered the thrill of winning enough tickets for a small plastic chameleon that changed color in warm water. It was a simple joy, a stark contrast to the quiet tension of my current rounds. I finished the interior, then moved to the exterior, checking the service alley door that led directly behind the prize booth. It was a standard steel door, secured with a deadbolt and a panic bar on the inside. My exterior check confirmed it was locked from the outside. No issues there. The rest of the patrol was uneventful. The sea breeze picked up, carrying the smell of salt and damp sand. Around 3:45, I started my second pass. This is standard procedure, a redundancy check to ensure nothing has shifted or been compromised since the first sweep. I entered the arcade again, the silence deeper this time. As I approached the prize booth, my flashlight beam found the door. It was closed. And the steel bar, the one I had personally seated and tested less than 3 hours ago, was now extended, fully engaged in the jam. The door was locked. My breath hitched. I stopped, my mind racing. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had secured that door. I'd felt the click. I'd tested it. And now it was locked from the inside. There was no external mechanism to engage that bar. I knelt, shining my light on the lock. The steel tongue of the bar was extended, yes, but there were fresh, bright scuff marks on the painted jam around it. Marks that hadn't been there before, indicating recent forceful engagement. Someone had thrown that bar. From the inside. My first thought was an intruder, someone I'd missed. But the building was supposed to be empty, and if they were inside, why lock themselves in? And then, why would they lock a door I had just secured? This wasn't an oversight. This was a deliberate act. I immediately radioed my supervisor. Unit 1 to supervisor. I have an anomaly at the Boardwalk arcade. Prize booth door, previously unsecured, now relocked from the interior. Relocked from the interior? Are you sure, Unit 1? The supervisor's voice crackled. Confirm, supervisor. Physical inspection shows the internal bar engaged and fresh scuff marks on the jam. I secured this door myself on the first pass. The standard protocol for a potential internal breach is to enter, clear the building with caution, and await backup. But I couldn't. The door was locked from the inside. Forcing it open would cause damage and compromise the scene. I was alone. My immediate entry protocol was effectively abandoned. I couldn't act until the supervisor arrived with additional resources. Stay clear of the door, Unit 1. Do not attempt entry. I'm en route. Check external cameras for activity. I moved to the service alley, my heart thumping a little harder than usual. The alley cam was mounted high, overlooking the rear entrance. I pulled up the feed on my tablet, rewinding to the time after my first sweep. The footage was grainy but clear enough. At 2:07:14, a figure stepped into frame from the far end of the alley. They were wearing a dark, oversized souvenir hoodie, the kind sold at the pier shops, the hood pulled low. They moved with a casual, almost languid pace towards the service door, the one that led directly behind the prize booth. They paused then, with a swift, practiced motion, seemed to manipulate something on the door. It was too dark to see clearly, but the door opened. The figure slipped inside. The timestamp rolled to 02:07:21. Then, the door didn't just close. It thumped shut. A heavy, final sound that even the low-quality audio picked up. A sound that suggested it had been pulled firmly, perhaps even slammed, from the inside. And then, nothing. The alley was empty again. The figure had vanished. The supervisor arrived with 2 patrol officers about 15 minutes later. I showed them the footage. The officers exchanged glances, their faces grim. The implications were clear. Someone had entered the building after I'd secured it, then locked themselves in. Using a master key, the officers carefully opened the service alley door. We moved in slowly, flashlights cutting through the darkness. Every corner, every game machine, every shadow was checked. We reached the prize booth. The steel bar was still engaged. One of the officers, a seasoned patrolman, used a pry bar to gently disengage it, careful not to damage the evidence. The door swung open. The prize booth was empty. The entire arcade was empty. No figure in a souvenir hoodie. No signs of forced entry anywhere else. No disturbed merchandise. Nothing. The officers conducted a thorough sweep of the entire building, attic to basement. Empty. They found no one. No trace of the figure from the video. It was as if they had simply ceased to exist after that door thumped shut. We filed our reports. The scuff marks on the jamb were photographed. The CCTV footage was downloaded. The case remains open. Every night now, when I approach that prize booth, I feel it. The cold certainty of an empty building, and the inexplicable fact that a door, once secured, relocked itself from the inside, after someone walked in and simply disappeared. The sound of that thumping door still echoes in my mind, a contradiction that no procedure, no protocol, no logical explanation can resolve. I've been a pier electrician for 17 years. Started as an apprentice right out of trade school, working the old boardwalks up and down the coast. Salt air and seawater are the enemy of everything electrical, so you learn to be thorough. You learn to trust your meters, trust the schematics, and trust the fundamental laws of physics. That trust keeps people safe on rides that were designed before most of us were born. Yesterday, that trust started to unravel. The squall hit around 14:30. Came in fast, a wall of gray wind and rain. I was in the workshop, replacing a burnt-out motor on a candy floss machine, when the radio crackled. Unit 1, Ferris wheel main breaker tripped. Panel reports full power loss. That was the security supervisor. I acknowledged, grabbed my diagnostics kit, multimeter, clamp meter, insulated gloves, arc flash face shield, and headed for the main breaker room. The Sky Sailor, as they called the Ferris wheel, was one of the older attractions, a steel behemoth from the 1930s. Its main breaker was a monstrous, oil-filled beast, and it rarely tripped without good reason. Usually a phase short, sometimes a motor fault. Inside the breaker room, the air was thick with the faint smell of ozone and damp concrete. I located the Sky Sailor's main panel. Sure enough, the colossal lever was thrown, indicating a trip. The red fault indicator light was lit. Steady. Standard procedure. Check for obvious damage, then attempt a reset. I scanned the area. No smoke, no scorch marks. Security. I'm at the main breaker. Confirming trip. Attempting reset. I braced myself. Engaged the heavy lever. It moved with a hydraulic thunk, locking into the on position. The indicator light switched to green. For 3 seconds. Then, with a shudder that vibrated through the concrete floor, the lever slammed back down to off. The red light flared again. A familiar sound, but always jarring. A hard short. Main tripped again, I reported. Heavy fault. I'll need to isolate the ride and trace the short. The next step was to go to the ride itself, to the local control booth at the base of the wheel. I needed to check the ride's internal fault panel, which often gave more specific error codes, and verify the power status at the motor control center. It was a 50-meter sprint through the driving rain. The wind whipped my rain slicker, plastering it to my body. The smell of frying oil from a nearby concession stand mixed with the clean, sharp scent of the sea. The control booth was a small, locked metal shed tucked under the wheel's main support structure. I fumbled with my keys, the rain drumming a relentless rhythm on the corrugated roof. Inside, it was dry but cold, smelling faintly of old grease and dust. The main control panel, a relic of Bakelite and brass switches, was dark. No indicator lights, no display. This was expected. The main breaker was thrown, so the ride should be completely dead. I pulled out my multimeter, set it to AC voltage, then current. I connected the leads to the main incoming terminals on the motor control panel. 0 volts, as expected. Then I clamped my amp meter around one of the primary phase wires leading into the ride's motor drive. This was the critical check. With the main breaker tripped, there should be no current flow, absolutely none. The clamp meter display flickered, not 0. It showed a reading, 0.7 amps, then 0.8, then 0.6, fluctuating, a live load. I stared at the display. This was impossible. The main breaker was thrown. There was no power source. It was a fundamental rule of electricity. No closed circuit, no current. I checked the meter's calibration, tapping it against my palm. It was fine. I reclamped it, tried another phase. Same result. A low, persistent, impossible current draw. My first thought was a faulty sensor on the old panel, a phantom reading. But my meter was showing it. This wasn't the panel's internal diagnostics. This was a direct measurement of current flowing through the primary feeder. As I stood there, trying to process the impossible reading, a deep, groaning creak echoed through the metal structure above me. It wasn't the sound of wind straining the frame. It was a slow, deliberate movement. I looked up, through the small window at the base of the wheel. One of the gondolas, which had been perfectly still at the bottom of its arc, seemed to shift. The massive steel spokes of the wheel moved, almost imperceptibly, one notch uphill. It was a slow, agonizing grind of metal on metal, a sound that felt like it was scraping against my teeth. Then it stopped. The wheel had moved, uphill, without power. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach, colder than the damp air in the booth. I tried to call the supervisor, my hands shaking slightly as I pulled out my work phone. The signal was spotty in the squall. As I held the phone to my ear, waiting for a connection, a low, resonant tone vibrated through the device. It wasn't coming from the earpiece, it was a physical sensation, a deep thrumming that I felt in my jawbone. It sounded like a distant foghorn, a mournful, drawn-out bellow. But the harbor horn had been retired last year, replaced by an automated light system. And this sound felt closer, like it was emanating from the very structure of the pier, or perhaps from the wheel itself. It faded as quickly as it came, leaving a ringing in my ears. "Supervisor, this is Unit 1. I'm at the Sky Sailor control booth. I've got a live load reading on the main feeder, even with the breaker tripped, and the wheel just moved, one notch uphill, without power." My voice sounded tighter than I intended. There was a pause on the line, static crackling. "Unit 1, repeat that last part?" I repeated it, trying to keep my voice steady. "The wheel moved, uphill, and there's an impossible current draw. Also, I'm picking up a low-frequency hum, almost like a foghorn, through my phone. Stay clear of the ride, Unit 1. Do not attempt to re-energize or investigate further at the wheel. Return to the breaker room and secure the main panel. We'll send out a specialist team. Log everything. My protocol at this point would be to meticulously trace the circuit, physically disconnecting sections to pinpoint the short. But with a live load on a de-energized system and the physical movement of the wheel, that protocol was abandoned. It wasn't an electrical fault anymore. It was something else, something I wasn't equipped to handle. My job was to fix electrical issues, not to explain impossible physics. I made my way back to the breaker room, the rain now a dull roar in my ears. My mind kept replaying the image of the wheel shifting, the impossible current. I thought of a summer evening years ago, fishing with my kid off the pier. The lights of the Sky Sailor twinkling against the twilight sky. Simple times. Back in the breaker room, I stood before the Sky Sailor's main breaker. It was still in the off position, the red fault light glowing. I pulled out my log tablet, my hands still cold. I started typing, detailing the sequence of events, the readings, the observed movement. As I typed, a low vibration started. It wasn't the floor this time. It was coming from the massive breaker itself. A deep, almost imperceptible thrum. It was the same resonant frequency I'd felt through my phone, the foghorn sound. The red fault indicator light, which had been steady, began to flicker. Not blinking, but a subtle, unstable pulse, as if something was trying to pull power through a closed, open circuit. I finished my log entry, noting the thrumming and the flickering light. The air in the breaker room felt heavy, charged. The rain outside intensified, and through the thick concrete walls I thought I could hear it again. A faint, distant creak, like metal straining under an unseen load. My final entry read, 1518. Anomalous power draw confirmed. Source unknown. Observed physical movement of ride structure without power. Recommend full structural and electrical decommission and investigation by external specialists. The red light continued its faint, unstable pulse. The breaker hummed. I've been the seasonal caretaker for the beachfront arcade and concessions for 7 years now. My job starts in late October, securing everything against the coming winter storms, and doesn't end until late April, when I begin the slow process of preparing for the summer crowds. It's a solitary existence for half the year, just me, the gulls, and the ceaseless ocean. My territory covers the entire boardwalk stretch, the main arcade building, the row of concession stands, and the various public access points to the beach. I carry a standard toolkit, a two-way radio linked to security dispatch, and a ruggedized GPS unit for logging patrol routes and any anomalies I encounter. Winterization is a precise operation. The main arcade facade, a sprawling structure of glass and painted plywood, gets enveloped in heavy-duty tarps. These aren't your hardware store variety. They're industrial-grade vinyl, custom-fitted, secured with hundreds of steel clamps and weighted down by sandbags filled with gravel. Each concession stand is boarded up, then similarly tarped. My daily routine involves a full perimeter check. I walk every inch, inspecting every clamp for tension, every rope for fraying, every sandbag for displacement. I log the condition, the ambient temperature, the wind speed and direction, and any visible changes, no matter how minor. It's a protocol I've followed thousands of times. The primary rule of winterization here, drilled into me by the previous caretaker, is redundancy. Every tarp is secured with more clamps than strictly necessary. Each clamp is double-checked for proper seating on the tarp grommet and the anchor point. The prevailing winds along this stretch of coast are consistently from the northwest, especially in winter. Our securing strategy accounts for this, creating a robust barrier designed to withstand sustained pressure from that direction. Anything less invites catastrophic damage during a gale. It was a Tuesday, late November. The morning air was crisp, carrying the sharp scent of brine and damp sand. The sky was a pale, cloudless blue, and the sun, though low, promised a rare, bright day. My log entry for 0715 noted a temperature of 41 degrees Fahrenheit and a wind speed of 8 knots, steady from the east. This was unusual. Typically, by this time of year, we're battling the northwesterlies. I remember thinking how pleasant it was, the wind at my back as I started my first pass along the arcade's south face. I was about halfway down the facade, checking the lower row of clamps, when I saw them. Not a torn tarp, not a loose clamp still attached to its anchor, but something laid out on the sand. A line of tarp clamps, maybe 20 in total, spaced roughly a foot apart, leading directly away from the arcade and towards the nearest dune gap. They were the heavy-duty steel clamps we use, glinting dully in the morning sun. My first thought was kids. It's a common enough occurrence in the off-season. Teenagers, bored and looking for trouble, sometimes try to pry off a tarp or two. They rarely succeed and usually leave their tools or attempts in a haphazard mess. I sighed, making a mental note to radio dispatch about potential trespassing later, and continued my visual sweep. It was a minor lapse, a dismissal born of familiarity, and I regret it now. I should have stopped, called it in immediately. But the pattern of the clamps nagged at me. This wasn't haphazard. They were laid out with an almost deliberate precision, a straight line pointing like an arrow. I walked over, my boots crunching on the damp sand. As I approached, I saw the footprints, 2 distinct sets. One larger, heavier impression, consistent with a man's work boot. The other, smaller, lighter, perhaps a woman's or a younger person's. Both sets were clear, heading in the direction of the dune gap. I followed them, my earlier annoyance given, and then I noticed the critical detail. There were no returning footprints. None. Just the 2 sets leading away, impressed into the sand, undisturbed by any subsequent passage. The eastward wind, which had felt so pleasant earlier, now felt like a silent accomplice. It wouldn't have erased tracks coming back towards the arcade. If anything, it would have preserved them by blowing sand away from the impressions. The line of clamps led me directly to the public dune access point, a wooden walkway that cuts through the fragile dune grass to the open beach. The footprints continued up the ramp, across the weathered planks, and down onto the wet, packed sand of the intertidal zone. I paused at the end of the walkway, scanning the vast, empty expanse of the winter beach. The metallic tang of salt spray was sharp on my tongue. The only sounds were the distant crash of waves and the cry of gulls circling overhead. The footprints continued along the waterline, heading south, parallel to the ocean. I followed, my eyes fixed on the sand. They were clear for another 100 yards, passing a clump of dried seaweed, then a piece of driftwood. And then, abruptly, they stopped. Both sets. In the middle of an otherwise undisturbed stretch of wet sand, the tracks simply ceased. There was no sign of a struggle, no drag marks, no sign of them turning back into the dunes or wading into the surf. They simply ended, as if the two individuals had lifted off the ground. My internal search protocol, honed over years of looking for lost items or signs of trespass, offered no logical explanation. It was a blank. I walked in expanding circles, checking for any deviation, any faint impression that might have been missed. Nothing. The sand was smooth, save for the retreating tide's patterns. I stood there for a long time, the cold seeping into my boots, staring at the empty beach. A memory flickered, unbidden. A summer afternoon, the boardwalk teeming with families, the cacophony of arcade games spilling out into the sunshine, the smell of hot dogs and sunscreen. It felt impossibly distant, a different world. This world was silent, desolate, and now profoundly unsettling. I made my way back to the arcade facade, my mind racing. I re-examined the tarps. The clamps were missing from the lowest section of the first two bays, precisely where the line of clamps had originated. The heavy vinyl, instead of being taut, sagged inward, pulled back just enough to reveal the boarded-up windows of the arcade. This wasn't wind damage. The tarps weren't torn. They had been deliberately loosened, the clamps removed, and then, for some unfathomable reason, those clamps had been laid out in a path leading away. But why? To what end? And why were the people who did it gone without a trace? My standard incident report template, designed for clear-cut cases of vandalism, theft, or storm damage, felt utterly inadequate. How do I log tarps loosened, clamps removed and laid in a line? 2 sets of footprints leading out, 0 returning prints. Individuals vanished from clear sand. The situation didn't fit any existing category. The protocol for reporting felt fundamentally broken by the evidence. I abandoned the idea of a simple report, knowing this would require direct communication with my supervisor. The eastward wind, still light but persistent, picked up slightly. The loosened tarps on the arcade facade began to flap. A rhythmic, heavy sound, like massive wings beating. Or perhaps like labored breathing. The empty beach stretched out, the waves rolling in with their endless, indifferent roar. I was alone with an inexplicable pattern, a vanished presence, and a silence that felt heavier than usual. My first year as a security officer for the coastal amusement park was mostly routine. Long nights, cold salt air, and the rhythmic sound of waves breaking beyond the main gate. My duties involved securing the perimeter, checking access points, and performing scheduled patrols through the various sections of the park. It was a big property, especially during the off-season when most rides were powered down, covered, and dormant. My gear was standard issue: duty belt, 2-way radio clipped to my shoulder, heavy-duty flashlight, and a ring of master keys that felt substantial in my hand. I knew the park layout by heart. Every creak of the boardwalk, every shadow cast by the towering ride structures. One particular night, A Tuesday in late October. The air was thick with mist. Visibility was down to 100 feet, maybe less. My shift started at 2200, and my first patrol loop took me past the Cyclone, the park's largest steel roller coaster. It was a massive structure, all red girders and looping tracks, silent and imposing in the fog. The Cyclone had been shut down for the season a month prior, completely de-energized. This meant no main power, no auxiliary power, no lighting beyond the emergency floodlights from the nearby Midway, and certainly no PA system. A dead ride was truly dead. That was a fundamental safety protocol. All systems, including the public address speakers mounted along its catwalks, were offline. The main control booth was locked, and its dedicated power supply was fused out at the Midway junction box, a procedure I'd personally verified during the shutdown process. Around 23:30, as I approached the Cyclone's base, I initiated my hourly radio check-in. Standard procedure. Dispatch, Unit 1, status check. My voice was a low, clear tone, practiced for radio etiquette. A moment of static, then, Unit 1 dispatch, copy status check, all clear? The dispatcher's voice was calm, a familiar presence on the line. All clear, dispatch. Proceeding past Cyclone, then North Sector. I clicked off the mic, already turning my flashlight beam up the first incline of the coaster's track. That's when I heard it, a faint, distorted echo. All clear, dispatch. Proceeding past Cyclone, then North Sector. My own words, coming from somewhere above, on the Cyclone's catwalk. I stopped dead. The sound was faint but unmistakable. It wasn't just an echo of my voice bouncing off the metal structure. It was a replay, distinct and complete, as if someone had recorded my transmission and played it back. But that was impossible. The ride was dead. No power, no PA. I swept my flashlight beam up the structure, through the mist. Nothing moved. No figures, no lights. My initial thought was a radio anomaly, maybe interference or a bizarre skip. But the clarity of the replay, even distorted, argued against that. It sounded like it was coming from a speaker. I pulled out my radio again. Dispatch, Unit 1. Did you copy any interference on my last transmission? Negative, Unit 1. All clear on this end. Why do you ask? Stand by, dispatch. Investigating a possible audio anomaly near the Cyclone. Copy, Unit 1. Keep us updated. I moved closer to the coaster's base. The sound had faded, but the unsettling feeling persisted. I walked directly to the main PA pole on the Midway, which supplied power to the coaster's public address system. I checked the inspection panel. Just as I remembered, the fuses were pulled, neatly clipped to the inside of the panel door. No power flow. I ran my hand over the cold metal of the pole. The heavy gauge wiring was disconnected. The PA system was absolutely, unequivocally dead. Next, I checked the access gate to the maintenance stairs. This gate was at ground level, secured with a heavy-duty padlock, part of my master key system. I shone my light on it. The lock was undisturbed, the chain tight. No signs of forced entry. This ruled out an intruder. The only way onto the catwalk was through this gate, or by scaling the structure, which was a 20-foot climb over slick, mist-covered girders. Highly unlikely and extremely dangerous. All clear, dispatch. Proceeding past cyclone, then north sector. The words came again, clearer this time, from the lower section of the catwalk, perhaps 100 feet up. It sounded like a speaker was active up there. A chill ran down my spine, despite the relative warmth of the coastal air. This wasn't an echo. This was a playback. And it was impossible. My training kicked in, or at least a rookie version of it. An unexplained audio source on a dead ride, potentially an active device where none should be. It warranted investigation. Standard protocol would be to report a potential breach and wait for a supervisor and possibly law enforcement. But the gate was secure, and I was convinced no one was up there physically. My mistake was assuming it was a technical fault I could identify, rather than an unknown. I decided to go up. I unlocked the maintenance gate, the heavy chain clanking softly in the mist. I secured the gate behind me. The metal stairs were cold, slick with condensation. The mist swirled around me as I ascended the first flight. Each step creaked under my boots. The air carried the distinct, briny smell of the ocean, a smell I'd grown used to, but tonight it felt heavier, almost metallic. I reached the first platform, a small landing where the stairs turned. The catwalk stretched out before me, a narrow, graded walkway running parallel to the track. All clear, dispatch. Proceeding past cyclone, then north sector. The voice was loud now, coming from just ahead, perhaps 30 feet along the catwalk. My flashlight beam cut through the mist, illuminating the graded metal, the dormant track. And there it was. Clipped to the safety rail, a standard-issue security handheld radio. My model. I approached it slowly, my heart thudding against my ribs. The radio was a dark silhouette against the gray mist. As I got closer, I could see the small red power indicator light was on, a faint glow. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the plastic casing. It was warm. Distinctly warm despite the cold, damp air, and the salt spray that coated everything. A vivid, irrelevant detail in the face of the impossible. I remembered a quiet evening last summer, sitting by the break room window, watching the sunset over the ocean. Simple, predictable. Nothing like this. I unclipped the radio from the rail. It felt solid in my hand, heavier than it should have been. The speaker crackled, then my own voice, clear as day, spoke. All clear, dispatch. Proceeding past cyclone, then north sector. It was playing my last transmission, the one I had just made. I held my own duty radio in my left hand, the found radio in my right. I keyed up my duty radio. Unit 1 to dispatch. I've located the source of the anomaly. As I spoke, the found radio in my other hand broadcast my words. My voice, my exact intonation, came from its speaker, a split second after I uttered them. It wasn't an echo. It was a direct, perfect mirror. I heard myself through the found radio saying, Unit 1 to dispatch. I've located the source of the anomaly. My hand tightened on both radios. I tried again. Dispatch, I'm hearing myself through this other unit. The found radio repeated. Dispatch, I'm hearing myself through this other unit. A wave of genuine dread washed over me. My radio communication, the bedrock of my job, was being perfectly mimicked, broadcast from a device that should not have been active, on a dead ride, in the middle of a foggy night. This wasn't a technical fault. This was something else. Unit 1, dispatch. Your transmission is breaking up. Repeat last. The dispatcher's voice, crackling faintly from my duty radio, sounded distant, almost lost. But the found radio still mirroring I didn't try to speak again. I just stood there, the warm radio in my hand, its speaker silently waiting to reflect my next utterance. My protocol for reporting an active unknown device on a de-energized system had failed. My communication with dispatch was compromised. I secured the found radio, clipping it to my own duty belt, and began my descent. The mist seemed to thicken around me, and the ocean's roar felt less like a comfort and more like a warning. I secured the gate again, double-checking the lock. I walked back to the security office, the strange radio heavy and warm against my hip, its power light still glowing faintly through the mist. I logged the incident, describing the found radio in the mirrored voice, but I knew my report wouldn't capture the full impossibility of it. The supervisor listened patiently, then took the radio, promising to have the technical team examine it in the morning. They never found anything wrong with it. It was a standard issue unit, fully functional, but with no record of ever being assigned to anyone. And it was never warm again. I've operated this concession stand, Sweet Cloud, for 17 years. It's a seasonal business, running from late spring through early fall, situated at the edge of the county fairgrounds. My routine is ingrained. Close down the cotton candy machine, clean the caramelizer, secure the till, and run the coin counter. The counter is an old model 720, a workhorse, but it rattles like a loose screw in a coffee can. Every night, without fail, I empty the coin hopper into a canvas bag, then into the office safe. The machine gets unplugged. This is standard procedure, non-negotiable. Last summer, business was slower than usual, but the routine remained. One Tuesday night after a particularly long shift, the air thick with the scent of damp earth from the sprinklers that had run too late, I was exhausted. I remember double-checking the till, locking the main door, but I must have been on autopilot. I was thinking about a conversation I'd had with one of the fairground maintenance crew about the persistent hum of the distant highway, a low thrum that always seemed to intensify after midnight. I secured the canvas bag of coins in the safe, but I didn't verify the coin counter's power switch. A small oversight, one that I usually never make. I live in a small apartment above the stand. It's convenient, but it means every creak and groan of the old structure is audible. Around 2 a.m, a sound woke me. It wasn't the usual settling of the building or the distant highway hum. This was closer, more rhythmic. A distinct metallic clatter, like marbles under glass, escalating into a rapid-fire tick, tick, tick. The coin counter. My heart seized. I threw on a pair of jeans and a t-shirt. The sound was coming from downstairs, from the main counter area. It was impossible. The stand was locked, the till secured. I moved quietly down the creaking stairs, my hand gripping the cold metal railing. The light from the fairgrounds' security lamps filtered weakly through the front windows, casting long, distorted shadows. The ticking was louder now, a frantic counting. I reached the bottom landing, paused and listened. The sound was definitely the Model 720. Its distinctive high-pitched whir followed by the rhythmic clink, clink, clink as coins dropped into the collection bin. But who? And how? My first thought was a break-in. I grabbed the heavy aluminum baseball bat I keep by the back door. The main counter area was dark, save for the faint glow of the counter's digital display. It was cycling through numbers, rapidly increasing. I flicked on the overhead fluorescent lights. The sudden harsh glare revealed an empty space. No one was there. The front door was still latched, the deadbolt engaged. No sign of forced entry. I approached the counter slowly, bat held ready. The machine was running, its hopper empty. Yet the display kept climbing. It was counting phantom coins. The numbers rolled from 0000 to 0001, then to 0002, gaining speed, quickly reaching into the hundreds. I stared at it, dumbfounded. The hopper was empty. There were no coins feeding into it. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly, and flipped the power switch. The whirring stopped abruptly. The display froze at 00732. I checked the till. It was still locked, the heavy steel drawer exactly as I'd left it. I pulled out my keys, unlocked it, and peered inside. The bundles of bills were undisturbed. The small canvas bag of coins from the previous day was gone, safely in the office safe. Nothing was missing from the till. Nothing. This was a contradiction. The counter had been running, counting something, but nothing had been taken and no one had been present. I checked the back door, the windows, all secure. The only thing I could think of was a power surge. We use a small, networked thermal printer for these. When a customer wins a prize, we log it. Item, date, time, and a brief description of the winner for inventory and marketing purposes. It's a simple system, designed for quick entries during busy periods. I walked into the small office behind the kitchen, the smell of burnt sugar still faint in the air, and powered on the computer. I navigated to the redemption software. The screen loaded. I pulled up the log for tonight, expecting to see nothing. But there were entries, 3 of them, all stamped with tonight's date, 0207 a.m., 0209 a.m., and 0211 a.m. The exact window the counter had been running. The first entry listed a prize, a large plush bear. The description field read, Subject of June 2023 Missing Person Report. The second, a novelty T-shirt. Description, Subject of July 2023 Vandalism Incident. The third, a small toy drone. Description, Subject of August 2023 Theft Report. My blood ran cold. I keep a binder of all incident reports from the fairgrounds, a necessity for insurance and security coordination. I dealt with all 3 of those cases myself. The June missing person was a teenager who vanished without a trace after a concert on the grounds. The July vandalism involved a young man caught spray painting the Ferris wheel. The August theft was a woman accused of shoplifting from a nearby souvenir shop. These were not just random names. These were specific, recorded incidents, unique identifiers in our internal system. I double-checked the timestamps. They were precise. 02:07 a.m., 02:09 a.m., 02:11 a.m. Each entry was logged moments apart, corresponding with the period the coin counter had been cycling. It was as if someone, or something, had been processing redemptions, but without any physical presence, without any actual prizes being given out, and without any money exchanged. The till was locked, undisturbed. The counter counted 732 phantom coins. I sat there, staring at the screen, the glowing text a stark contradiction to everything I knew about my stand, about how things worked. The system was designed to require physical interaction. A prize handed over, a button pressed, an entry typed. There was no way for these entries to appear without someone being at the keyboard, without a prize being physically removed from inventory. Yet, my inventory was intact. The prizes were all there, untouched. I remembered a summer evening years ago, just after I'd bought the stand. The fairgrounds were quiet, the air warm and still. I'd watched my own child, then just a toddler, marvel at the glow of the distant Ferris wheel, her face sticky with cotton candy. It was a simple, perfect moment, the kind of memory that anchored me to this place. Now, that anchor felt like it was dragging. I printed the log. 3 sheets of thermal paper, curling slightly in the cool office air. The names, or rather the incident report identifiers, stared back at me. There was no explanation. No forced entry, no missing cash, but a digital record of impossible transactions, logged by an invisible hand, timed to the phantom counting of an unplugged machine. The sound of marbles under glass still echoed in my ears, a sound that had lured me to an impossible truth. I secured the printouts in a plastic sleeve, then locked the office door. I didn't know what else to do. The sun would be up in a few hours, and I would open the stand, but the quiet hum of the fairgrounds would never sound the same again. I've been a lifeguard for 22 years. Most of that time has been spent patrolling these same stretches of coastline, from the main public beaches to the more isolated coves and the rocky outcroppings. You learn the rhythm of the water, the way the sand shifts with the tides, the specific sound a rip current makes against the pilings of the old pier. You learn to read the ocean like a book, even when you're off duty. Tonight, the book was open to a page I didn't like. It was just past 1900. The light was fading fast, the kind of gray-blue twilight that makes the ocean look vast and indifferent. I was walking the northern end, a habit I picked up early in my career. Even off the clock, I assess conditions. Wind chop, swell direction, the state of the rip current warning signs. The air carried the sharp tang of salt and something else. A faint, almost metallic scent I've always associated with distant, heavy weather. Over the low drone of the surf, I could just make out the rhythmic, slightly off-key squeak of the buoy bell marking the channel entrance. A sound that usually brings a strange comfort. My path took me past the old storm steps, a concrete structure built into the bluff to provide access to the beach below, especially during high tide. They were solid, designed to withstand serious weather, but the lower half was often submerged during winter swells. Tonight the tide was high, but not exceptionally so. The waves were running long and low, a deceptively calm pattern that often precedes larger, more unpredictable sets. That's when I saw them. 2 shoes, a pair of worn canvas sneakers, sitting neatly at the top of the lower landing. They were placed side by side, toes pointing seaward, almost as if someone had intentionally set them down before descending further. My internal alarm system, honed by decades of vigilance, immediately ratcheted up. People don't just leave their shoes like that unless they're coming right back. And if they're coming right back, why aren't they visible? The first rule of beach safety, the one drilled into every rookie, is always account for the person. Unclaimed items, especially clothing or personal effects, are immediate red flags. My initial thought was that a fisherman might have left them, perhaps waded out to cast a line, but the water was too cold for that without waders, and the shoes were dry. I checked my watch. 19:07. I pulled out my phone, already dialing the dispatch number for the beach patrol. The signal here, tucked against the bluff, was notoriously spotty. The call connected, then dropped. I tried again, moving a few feet up the steps. Nothing. This was a minor mistake, a misjudgment of how quickly I could get a signal in this specific pocket. I should have known better than to rely on it here. I descended the steps cautiously, my eyes scanning the immediate area. The sand below the steps was wet, but the tide had clearly been higher, leaving a distinct line of dampness. No immediate sign of anyone. The rip current warning sign, a weathered wooden board, stood sentinel further down the beach, its paint faded but its message still clear. A subtle shift in the ocean's cadence caught my attention. The long, low swells that had been rolling in began to show a different character. The interval between them stretched, then shortened. The water became strangely still, almost glassy, before the next set began to build. This was the deceptive calm, the telltale sign of a sneaker wave. I've seen them before, these rogue waves that break unexpectedly larger than the preceding sets, often catching people unawares. I moved closer to the shoes, my gaze fixed on the water. The first wave of the new set rolled in, a long, low hump that looked innocuous. It washed over the lower landing, barely reaching the top step where the shoes sat. Then, without warning, the next wave peaked. It wasn't particularly tall, but it carried an immense volume of water. It was a sheet wave, a solid wall of water that surged forward with surprising speed. It didn't break with a crash, but rather flowed, a smooth, powerful current. As I watched, mesmerized by its silent power, the wave engulfed the lower landing. It didn't just wash over it. It filled it. And then, I saw it. A foam cooler, a standard white rectangular model, bobbing just beyond the steps. The sheet wave caught it, lifted it effortlessly, and carried it sideways, tumbling it end over end down the beach before the water receded. It was a stark, visceral demonstration of the wave's force. My heart hammered. A cooler. That meant someone had been settled, possibly fishing, or just enjoying the last light. The shoes, the cooler. The pieces clicked into place, forming a picture I didn't want to see. This was no longer just unclaimed property. This was a missing person. I broke into a run, scrambling down the remaining steps, my boots crunching on the wet sand. I needed to get to the water's edge, to see if there was anything else, any other sign. The sand was dark here, packed hard by the receding water. I could see faint indentations, footprints heading towards the water, then turning back, then a confused scuff mark. The detail was blurry in the dim light, but it was there. A record of someone's last moments on solid ground. I reached the edge of the water just as the next crest hammered the lower landing. This one broke with a roar, sending spray high into the air. It was a heavier wave than the last, a true breaker, and it scoured the sand with relentless force. When the water pulled back, the sand was smooth, pristine. The faint indentations, the scuff marks, they were gone, erased. The ocean had claimed its evidence. I stood there, panting, staring at the blank canvas of the sand. The shoes remained on the steps, untouched. A silent testament to a presence that had been there moments before. The distant fishing lights, tiny pinpricks of yellow and green on the horizon, seemed impossibly far away, detached from the raw power I had just witnessed. I pulled out my phone again, frantic. This time I got 2 bars. I connected to dispatch. "Lifeguard, off duty," I gasped into the phone. "I have an abandoned item situation. Possible missing person. Storm steps, north end. Witnessed a sneaker wave. Cooler swept away. Footprints erased." The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional. "Copy that, lifeguard. Sending Unit 2. Can you confirm last known location of the cooler?" I looked down the beach, but the light was too poor. The cooler was gone, swallowed by the vast, indifferent expanse of the ocean. "Negative," I replied, my voice tight. "No visual." The wave took it. The shoes sat there, a neat, unsettling pair. They were ordinary, unremarkable, yet they were the only solid thing left. A silent question mark against the overwhelming power of the sea. I thought about a time, years ago, when I'd helped a father and his young daughter build a sandcastle right here, just below these steps. The little girl had laughed as the gentle waves nibbled at their turrets, oblivious to the ocean's true strength. Tonight, there was no laughter, only the relentless, hungry sound of the surf. The ocean gives, and the ocean takes. And sometimes, it takes everything, leaving nothing but an empty pair of shoes. I've worked commercial property maintenance for 15 years, mostly in the Tri-County area. Everything from apartment complexes to manufacturing plants. For the last 7, it's been this family entertainment center, an arcade, laser tag arena, and miniature golf course. It's an older building, originally a department store from the 70s, so it's got the kind of quirks you'd expect. Weird structural additions, repurposed spaces, and a service tunnel network that feels like an afterthought. My partner and I are responsible for everything from HVAC to the prize counter locks. We know the building better than anyone. We have to. Our day starts early, usually before the first shift arrives. We run through system checks, make sure nothing's flooded or smoking, and prep the arcade machines. This particular Tuesday started like any other. The morning was cool, a damp chill in the air that promised rain later. We'd just finished a quick check of the main compressor room, situated in the building's southwest corner. It's a cramped space, loud with the thrum of refrigeration units and the faint, oily smell of machinery. One of the air handlers had been cycling oddly, its pressure gauge fluctuating by a few psi more than usual. I'd noted it in the log, planning to check the condenser coils later. It wasn't critical, but it was a deviation. From the compressor room, our next stop was the prize cage, clear across the building on the northeast side. That meant a walk through a section of the main arcade, then a detour through a less used service tunnel. The prize cage needed a restock of the higher value items, and that meant using the master key ring. This ring held every key for every lock in the building, offices, storage, server rooms, and especially the prize cage. It was a heavy, substantial thing, a good half-pound of brass and steel, secured with a carabiner clip. Our protocol for the master ring is absolute. It never leaves your person. It's either in a locked cabinet or clipped to your belt loop, or in your hand if actively using it. There's no setting it down, no leaving it on a counter, no exceptions. The policy is drilled into us. A lost master key means a full rekeying of the entire facility. A massive expense and security nightmare. I'd seen a junior tech get written up once for leaving a less critical submaster on a workbench for 5 minutes. That's how serious it was. I remember clipping the master ring to my belt loop as we left the compressor room. I felt the familiar weight settle against my hip. My partner was already heading out, pulling the heavy fire door shut behind us. We walked through the main arcade, past rows of silent, dark machines. The air in here always held a faint scent of stale popcorn and ozone, even before opening. It was a sensory detail I'd grown accustomed to, like the specific hum of the fluorescent lights that were already on in the service corridors. We veered left into the service tunnel access, a narrow, concrete passage lit by caged bulbs. The tunnel was cool, the air still and dusty. Pipes ran overhead, dripping condensation intermittently. We reached the prize cage, and I reached for the master ring. My hand went to my belt loop. Nothing. I patted my other hip, checked my pockets. Nothing. The heavy, reassuring weight was gone. "Keys," I said, my voice flat. My partner turned, his brow furrowed. "The master ring. It's not here." We both stood there for a beat, the silence of the empty arcade suddenly oppressive. Then the scramble began. We retraced our steps, slowly, meticulously. Back through the service tunnel, then through the arcade, all the way back to the compressor room. We checked every inch of the floor, under every machine, along every pipe. We even checked inside the compressor room, though I was certain I'd clipped them after leaving. My partner checked the air handler housing, just in case. The pressure gauge still showed that slight fluctuation. The distance was maybe 150 feet, tops. A straight shot. There were no side passages, no open doors, no places for a heavy object to simply vanish. We moved like detectives, eyes scanning the concrete, the worn carpet, the grimy walls. The entire search took less than 10 minutes. The keys were simply not there. The dread was a cold knot in my stomach. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a catastrophe. I pictured the supervisor's face, the paperwork, the inevitable rekeying. We were back in the service tunnel, about halfway between the compressor room and the prize cage, standing near a section of wall that had always looked odd. It was a patch of plywood, painted to match the faded concrete, installed sometime in the 70s when the building was first converted. There was a small square grate set into it, about 6 inches by 6 inches. A ventilation cover that didn't seem to vent anything. It was always cold to the touch, colder than the surrounding wall. I'd once checked the blueprints for that section, years ago, out of idle curiosity. The schematics showed solid wall behind it. Just structural concrete and then the exterior. No ductwork, no void, no crawl space. We stood there, defeated, about to call it in. The silence in the tunnel was thick, broken only by the distant hum of the building's systems. Then a metallic clatter. It was sharp, distinct, echoing in the confined space. We both froze, looking at each other. The sound had come from the wall, specifically from the grate. We walked closer, slowly. The grate was still there, undisturbed. We knelt. The sound hadn't been behind the grate. It had come from it. And then the keys appeared. They simply dropped. One moment the grate was empty, just the dark, dusty interior of its small opening. The next, the heavy brass master ring materialized, tumbling out. The carabiner was still clipped, still secure. I stared at them, then at my partner, then back at the grate. My partner's face was pale, his eyes wide. Did you see that?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. I nodded, unable to speak. I reached down, my hand trembling slightly, and picked up the ring. It was cold, colder than it should have been, almost as if it had been in refrigeration. The metal felt alien in my hand. We spent the next hour trying to make sense of it. We checked the grate again. I even tried to pry it open, but the screws were rusted solid. We got the original blueprints from the facility's office. They confirmed it. Solid wall. No void. No access. No hidden room. No ductwork leading to that specific point. It was just a painted plywood section with a grate, covering what should have been structural concrete. There was no way to get into that space, let alone for a heavy object to fall out of it. It was like a prop from an old movie, a fake vent. My partner suggested someone had played a trick, but there was no one else in the building at that hour, and no one could have known we'd lost the keys, let alone where to drop them. And the speed. 10 minutes. No one could have found them, run to that specific, inexplicable grate, and dropped them in time. We logged the incident as master keys found on service tunnel floor near grate. We omitted the part about them appearing from nowhere. How do you log that? What protocol covers keys materializing from a solid wall? The security protocol for a lost master keyring dictates a full rekeying. But the keys weren't lost. They were returned. The protocol failed because it couldn't account for the impossible. We still work here. Every time I walk past that section of the service tunnel, I glance at the grate. It's still there, cold and but the knowledge that something can just emerge from a place that doesn't exist, a space that defies the building's very structure, it changes how you see everything. The building feels bigger now, less understood. Sometimes, late at night, when the arcade is quiet, I think about that grate, and I wonder what else might be behind the walls we can't see, waiting to return. I've been the clerk at the Piers bait shop for 15 years. Most days it's a quiet rhythm of stocking live shrimp, mixing chum, and weighing catches for the charter boats. My shift starts before dawn, unlocking the roll-down door, brewing coffee, and checking the equipment. The pier itself is old, concrete and weathered. stretching a good quarter-mile into the bay. We rely on a lot of heavy-duty gear here, especially the large diesel generator we keep secured near the shop's rear entrance. It's our backup for power outages, essential for keeping the bait tanks aerated and the freezers cold. Without it, a whole day's inventory can spoil, a significant loss. Security is a constant thought. We're a public access point, and while most people are here to fish or enjoy the view, there's always an element. Over the years, I've developed a mental checklist for anything out of the ordinary. A new face, a vehicle parked too long, someone lingering near the secured areas. Any contractor working on the pier or our equipment has to check in with the pier manager first, get a permit, and usually wear a specific uniform. They'll have a work order number I can verify, and often I know the crews by sight. It's a system that's worked, keeping things orderly and safe for a long time. This morning started like any other late spring day. The air was cool, carrying the sharp tang of salt and diesel from the fishing fleet already heading out. I was wiping down the counter, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, when I heard the distinct rumble of the generator being moved. It's a heavy unit, mounted on a solid steel frame with stout wheels, but it still makes a sound when it's rolled across the concrete. I stepped out of the back room, expecting to see the pier manager or one of the maintenance crew. Instead, a man was pushing it. He was wearing a safety vest, bright orange, almost too new, with crisp, reflective stripes that hadn't seen a day of sun. His posture was stiff, almost formal as he maneuvered the generator away from its usual spot by the roll-down door. He was heading for the parking apron, where a dark-colored cargo van sat idling. The van's license plates were obscured with what looked like black electrical tape, crudely applied. My first thought was that I must have missed a memo. It happens. Sometimes the manager schedules work without telling me directly, especially if it's an emergency. I'd been up since 3, and a slight headache was starting to throb behind my eyes. I probably should have checked my work email before I even brewed coffee. A small oversight, but enough to make me hesitate. "Morning," I called out, trying to sound casual, walking towards him. "City crew today?" The man stopped pushing the generator. He turned, and I got a better look. He was average height, nondescript features, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the pier. On his chest, clipped to the vest, was an ID badge. It read, "City Electrical," in bold letters. Below that, there was a circular seal. But something was off. The city seal is distinctive, an anchor and a lighthouse. This one had a stylized, almost cartoonish wave, and the anchor looked more like a fishing hook. It was a cheap print, the colors slightly faded, like it had been run on an old inkjet printer. "Just picking up the generator for servicing," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any inflection. He didn't offer a name or a work order number. "Servicing?" I asked, my internal alarm bells starting to ring louder. "We just had it serviced last month. Everything's logged." I walked a little closer, trying to get a better look at the badge, at him. The smell of low-tide mudflats, usually a comforting scent, mixed with the faint, sickly sweet odor of cheap air freshener drifting from the van. He didn't respond, just watched me. His gaze felt heavy, unblinking. "Do you have a work order number I can check?" I pressed, reaching for the clipboard where we keep our maintenance logs. "Or perhaps a supervisor's name." I usually get a call ahead of time for something like this. A slow smile spread across his face. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was a knowing, almost predatory expression. He didn't say anything, but his eyes flicked towards the van. As if on cue, the van's engine note changed, a low growl, and it began to roll forward, slowly, silently, towards us on the apron. The side door, the kind that slides open, was already ajar. My heart rate picked up. This wasn't right. This was a violation of the protocol I'd relied on for years. I knew then that this wasn't a mistake, not a missed memo. This was a theft, brazen and direct. I needed to call someone, the pier manager, the police. I reached for my phone, which I usually keep clipped to my belt. It wasn't there. I'd left it charging in the back office, a habit I'd picked up recently because the battery had been unreliable. Another small oversight, but this one felt massive. "Hold on a second," I said, trying to project authority I didn't feel. I stepped fully in front of the generator, blocking his path. "You can't just take this, it's city property." The man's smile didn't falter, but his body language shifted. He leaned slightly forward, his shoulders tensing. It wasn't an overt threat, no clenched fists or raised voice, but the message was clear. Move or be moved. I remembered a quiet afternoon, years ago, teaching my grandchild how to cast a line off this very pier. The simple joy of watching their concentration, the thrill of a small bite. That memory felt impossibly distant now, replaced by a cold, sharp dread. I hesitated, caught between my duty and a primal instinct for self-preservation. He was bigger than me, younger, and he had that van waiting. My protocol for reporting suspicious activity, observe, document, call, was failing. I couldn't document the plates and I couldn't call. He didn't push me. He didn't need to. He simply steered the generator around me, a fluid, practiced movement. The van was right beside him now. The side door slid open fully, revealing a dark, empty cargo space. Two more figures were visible inside, shadows in the dim interior, their faces obscured. They moved with a chilling efficiency, reaching out, grabbing the generator, and hauling it into the van in a matter of seconds. No words were exchanged. The generator disappeared into the darkness. The man in the fresh safety vest didn't look at me again. He simply climbed into the passenger seat of the van. The door slammed shut. The engine roared, and the van peeled out of the parking apron, tires squealing faintly, heading for the main road. The taped plates were all I saw as it vanished around the bend. I stood there, alone on the pierhead, the empty space where the generator had been a gaping hole. The air still smelled of salt and diesel, but now it also carried the faint, unsettling scent of cheap air freshener. My phone was still in the back office, charging. The pier manager wouldn't be in for another hour. By then, they would be long gone. I had no plate number, no name, just a memory of a misprinted seal and a smile that promised trouble. The system had failed, not because of a flaw in the rules, but because of a human element I hadn't accounted for. A calm, confident individual who knew exactly how to exploit the small gaps, the moments of distraction, the quiet assumptions of a normal morning. And as the sun began to climb higher, painting the bay in hues of orange and pink, I couldn't shake the feeling that they had known my routine, known about the generator, and known exactly when I would be alone. They had been watching. For 15 years, I've been a ride painter, specializing in the restoration of vintage amusement park attractions. My work takes me to parks across the Northeast, but this particular carousel, nestled in a historic lakeside park, is one I know intimately. Its original structure dates back to 1912, and the horses, hand-carved from basswood, require a specific touch. Multiple layers of enamel, fine-line detailing, and a final clear coat that mimics the original shellac finish. It's meticulous work, requiring a steady hand and an eye for historical accuracy. During the off-season, when the park is shuttered, the carousel house becomes my studio. The silence is usually absolute, broken only by the hum of my air compressor or the whisper of a fine bristle brush against a horse's flank. This past November, I was deep into the annual winter overhaul. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp leaves and the distant, briny tang of the lake. Inside the carousel house, the temperature hovered around 45 degrees, just warm enough for the paints to cure properly. I had set up my drop cloths, masking tape, and a battery of HVLP spray guns and detailing brushes. My current focus was the lead stallion, a magnificent creature with a flowing mane and a proud, rearing stance. I was applying the final coat of its base white, a critical layer that would provide the luminosity for the subsequent colors. The respirator muffled the world, leaving me to the rhythmic hiss of the spray gun and the faint, sweet chemical scent of the enamel. The park's off-season protocol is clear. All non-essential personnel are off-site. Maintenance crews operate on a strict schedule, with every entry and exit logged by park security. The carousel house, being a valuable asset, is secured with heavy-duty locks, and access is restricted to myself and the head of maintenance, who usually only checks in once a week. I prefer working alone. It allows for concentration, especially when dealing with the delicate curves of a horse's bridle or the tiny, painted eyes. It was just past 4:30 p.m., the late autumn light fading quickly outside the high windows, when I heard it. A distinct, hollow thud directly above me. Then another. And another. Footsteps, measured and deliberate, moving in a slow circle on the upper deck of the carousel. The deck, where the rider's stand was currently bare, stripped of its flooring panels for inspection, leaving only the structural beams and the central pole. Anyone walking up there would be walking directly on the exposed timbers, making every step resonate. I paused, lowering my spray gun. My first thought was annoyance. Someone had breached protocol. I pulled down my respirator, the sudden rush of cool, paint-scented air a sharp contrast to the filtered breath. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing slightly in the vast, empty space. No response. Only the lingering, almost imperceptible metallic tang of the fresh enamel paint. A vivid but ultimately irrelevant sensory detail filling the air. The footsteps continued their slow, rhythmic circuit. Thud, thud, thud. I checked my watch. 4:37 p.m. The minute hand clicked forward, then, impossibly, seemed to click again at the same mark before continuing its sweep. I blinked, rubbing my eyes. Fatigue, I told myself. Sometimes, after hours of staring at fine details, your vision plays tricks. I walked to the base of the winding staircase that led up to the deck. A heavy chain and padlock secured the gate, just as I'd left it that morning. No signs of tampering. I tried the radio on my belt. "Security, this is Carousel Painter. I've got unexplained sounds on the upper deck. Can you confirm if anyone is logged in for this area?" A moment of static, then the security officer's calm voice. Carousel painter? Negative. No person. All doors secure on our last perimeter check at 1600. You're the only one on site. The footsteps continued their slow, measured loop above me. I timed them now out of a growing unease. Roughly 60 seconds per circuit. Each step a clear, resonant echo. It was too regular, too precise to be someone casually exploring. It was almost mechanical. I tried to resume my work, but my focus was shattered. Every stroke of the brush felt forced. The fresh paint, still wet and gleaming on the stallion's leg, seemed to mock my attempts at normalcy. I kept glancing at my watch. 4:42 p.m. The minute hand ticked once, then ticked again at the same mark. A tiny, almost imperceptible stutter, before finally moving on. It wasn't fatigue. My watch, a reliable field instrument, was doing something impossible. The footsteps above solidified from an annoyance into a cold dread. The park was closed. No one should be here. And my watch, that was a problem. I had always prided myself on my meticulous nature, my adherence to procedure. But this was outside any procedure I knew. My professional protocol dictates that I complete my assigned task, especially a critical layer of paint, before addressing distractions. But the footsteps were no longer a distraction. They were an active, unsettling presence. I made a decision. I would abandon the protocol for the moment. I needed to see what was up there. It was a lapse in judgment, a deviation from safety, given the wet paint and the risks of moving equipment. But the need to understand was overriding. I grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight and ascended the winding metal stairs. Each step I took seemed to mute the sounds above. By the time I reached the top landing, the footsteps had ceased entirely. The upper deck stretched out, bare and empty. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light filtering through the grime-streaked windows. No footprints. No signs of recent passage. The polished mirror panels, usually reflecting a kaleidoscope of lights in motion, now reflected only my own bewildered image and the empty expanse of the deck. I swept the powerful beam of my flashlight across every corner, every beam, every hidden recess. Nothing. Not a shadow, not a displaced piece of dust. The silence up there was absolute, a stark contrast to the rhythmic thuds I'd been hearing moments before. I checked my watch again. 4:51 p.m. The minute hand ticked once, then twice, at the same mark, before moving on. The anomaly was undeniable. It wasn't my eyes or my watch, it was something else. A sudden, vivid memory surfaced. A summer day, decades ago, my parents lifting me onto the back of the very horse I was painting. The smell of popcorn and cotton candy, the joyful cacophony of the carousel organ. It was a memory of simple, unadulterated happiness, a stark and painful contrast to the cold, unsettling reality I now faced. I descended the stairs, my heart thudding against my ribs. The moment my feet touched the ground floor, the hollow, measured footsteps resumed above me. Thud, thud, thud. One circuit, two, precisely once every minute. I looked at my watch. The minute hand ticked twice at the same mark before moving on. The fresh paint on the horses, still wet and glistening, seemed to hold a strange, almost suspended quality. It was as if the very act of drying, of progressing through time, was struggling against an unseen current. I knew then that it wasn't just the footsteps that were looping, but something about the flow of time itself. at least within this isolated, silent carousel house. I packed my tools, leaving the lead stallion's final base coat unfinished, a direct violation of my usual meticulous schedule. I radioed security again, reporting unexplained sounds, and stating I was leaving for the day due to technical issues. I couldn't bring myself to explain the watch, the repeated tick, the impossible loop. They wouldn't understand. The next morning, the park was just as empty, just as silent. The cold had deepened. I walked into the carousel house, my breath misting in the air, a knot of apprehension in my stomach. I set up my drop cloths, mixed my paint. As soon as I picked up the spray gun, the first hollow, measured thud echoed from the deck above. Then another, and another. I looked at my watch. The minute hand ticked once. Then, with a subtle, almost imperceptible stutter, it ticked twice at the same mark before moving on. The loop had begun again, and I was still inside it. I've been a delivery driver for this coastal district for 17 years. Most of that time, I've run the early morning route, hitting the boardwalk businesses before the sun clears the horizon. My vehicle is a standard long wheelbase cargo van, equipped with a refrigerated compartment for produce and a heavy-duty dolly. My route covers roughly 80 miles of shoreline, from the old fishing village up north to the amusement piers further south. I know these roads, these boards, like the back of my hand. This particular morning, the pre-dawn air was mild for late fall, registering 42 degrees Fahrenheit on the dash thermometer. My internal clock was already calibrated to the rhythm of the route. Load check at 300, departure at 3:30, first drop at 4:15. Everything was running precisely on schedule. The air was still, carrying the faint, sweet smell of salt and stale funnel cake from the deserted midway. A thin, high-pitched whine from the refrigeration unit was the only constant sound in the quiet dark. One of the core protocols for operating a commercial vehicle, especially in a coastal environment, is constant awareness of road conditions. That means checking the air temperature, ground temperature, and humidity. It means knowing how moisture behaves at certain temperatures. Below freezing, you watch for ice. Above freezing, you watch for standing water. It's simple physics, drilled into every driver. I'd checked the dashboard display at the depot, and again before I turned onto the main access road for the boardwalk. Air temp 42, ground temp 40. No precipitation in the forecast. Clear skies. My first delivery was to the Sunrise Cafe, a small diner at the far end of the main midway. To get there, I had to drive the length of the boardwalk, a stretch of treated lumber planks that always felt a little slick, even when dry, from years of spilled sodas and cooking oil. I usually took it slow, 20 miles an hour max. This morning, I was maybe pushing 25, a minor lapse in caution. Perhaps a result of the easy conditions and the lack of traffic. My mind was already on the next drop, the bakery that needed fresh dough by 4:45. As the van rolled past the darkened arcades, their windows reflecting the faint blue glow of my headlights, I felt it. A sudden, sickening loss of traction. The rear end of the van kicked out hard to the right. A low, grinding growl from the tires as the ABS system fought for grip. My hands tightened on the wheel, correcting instinctively. The van fishtailed once more, then shuddered back into line. I brought it to a complete stop, heart hammering against my ribs. I sat there for a moment, breathing deep, checking the mirrors. No damage. No other vehicles. Just the quiet hum of the engine and the distant, rhythmic crash of waves on the beach. I'd hit something. My initial thought was spilled grease or maybe a rogue patch of algae, but the skid had felt different, sharper. I put the transmission in park, grabbed my high-visibility vest, and stepped out, flashlight in hand. The air was still 42 degrees, but beneath my boots, the boardwalk planks were dusted with a fine, crystalline frosting. It wasn't thick, just a thin, almost invisible sheen, like powdered sugar scattered across dark wood. I knelt, shining the light directly onto it. The frost sparkled, reflecting the beam in 1,000 tiny points. I touched it. It was cold, unnaturally so, given the ambient temperature. It felt like touching something pulled straight from a freezer. This wasn't just condensation, it was ice, solid and slick, on a surface that should have been well above freezing. I stood, scanning the immediate area. The patch of frost extended for about 15 feet, right where my tires had lost grip, then tapered off. Beyond it, the boards were dry and dark. It was localized, confined to this one stretch of the midway. As I walked forward, examining the planks, a low, persistent hum caught my attention. It was coming from one of the darkened attractions, a massive skeletal structure that usually held the Thunderbolt roller coaster sign. The sign itself was gone, just the bare metal frame where the neon tubes would have been mounted. But the frame was buzzing, a deep, resonant vibration I could feel in the air, even from 50 feet away. There were no letters, no lights, just the empty frame and that hum, like a giant, sleeping insect. I pulled my phone, thumbing open the incident report app. Protocol dictated I document any road hazard. But what was I going to report? Black ice at 42 degrees, accompanied by a buzzing, unpowered sign frame? Dispatch would think I was either hallucinating or trying to get out of a delivery. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the submit button. This wasn't a standard hazard. This was anomalous. I decided to complete the delivery first. The Sunrise Cafe's back door was a few hundred feet further down. I retrieved the dolly from the van, loaded the crates of produce, and started rolling them toward the diner. The dolly's wheels squeaked faintly on the dry boards. As I rounded the corner, past the cafe and toward the seawall, my gaze drifted to the gulls. There were dozens of them, perched along the concrete barrier separating the boardwalk from the beach. Usually at this hour, they'd be squabbling over scraps or swooping for breakfast. But these gulls were different. Every single one, from the smallest, immature bird to the largest adult, was facing the exact same direction, out toward the dark, churning ocean. And they were utterly silent. Not a single cry, not a rustle of feathers. They were just watching, like an audience. I stopped the dolly, the rubber wheels silent on the planks. The hum from the sign frame seemed to deepen, a subtle shift in its frequency. The air felt I stood there, caught between the inexplicable frost, the buzzing frame, and the silent, staring birds. It was like a tableau, frozen in the pre-dawn gloom. For a moment I remembered taking my kid to this very spot years ago, watching them chase the gulls, their laughter echoing across the sand. The memory felt impossibly distant now, almost alien. My comms unit crackled. Unit 4, confirm ETA to bakery. You're running behind schedule. It was dispatch, a voice that cut through the strange stillness. I blinked, pulling my attention away from the gulls. Unit 4, copy, on my way. Slight delay with road conditions on the midway. Proceeding now. I didn't mention the frost, the sign, or the gulls. How could I? I couldn't even explain it to myself. I pushed the dolly, the squeak of its wheels suddenly deafening in the silence. As I passed the gulls, their heads remained fixed, unmoving. Not one of them turned to acknowledge my presence. They just watched the ocean. A solid, unblinking line of white and gray against the dark. The cold from the boards seemed to cling to my boots. I made the delivery, then drove the van back past the buzzing sign frame. The hum was still there, unchanged. The patch of frost, however, was gone. Vanished without a trace, leaving only dry, dark wood. The dashboard thermometer still read 42 degrees. I pulled over to the side of the road, checked the ground sensor again. 40 degrees. The numbers were consistent. There was no physical evidence of what I'd encountered. When I finally reached the bakery, the owner, a man who had known me for years, asked why I looked so pale. I just told him I'd hit a slick spot on the boardwalk. He nodded, used to the strange conditions of a coastal town. I logged the incident as unconfirmed road hazard, adding a note about unusual local. I knew it would likely be dismissed as driver error, or perhaps a faulty sensor reading, but I knew what I'd seen. The gulls, the sign, the frost that shouldn't have been there. They were all gone by the time the sun came up, leaving nothing but the regular noise of the world, and a quiet certainty that the world wasn't quite as regular as I thought.